Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting us to the P3 Airport Summit. And I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tom Rosbach. I'm with HNTB. I have over 39 years of airport experience on a range of airport projects, from terminals to infrastructure, runways, landside and airside. And I've worked over 45 different airports during my career on projects. Specifically on P3 projects, I've worked on projects at Athens International Airport, Ataturk International Airport in Turkey, the City of Chicago Midway privatization experience, Bermuda's P3 terminal redevelopment, and some due diligence on the Kansas City master plan, which was used as a guide to start the P3 project there. I'm going to turn over to Julie, and she'll talk about herself.
Hey, good morning. I'm Julie Wienberg. I'm the aviation architecture practice leader for H&TB. So I have 26 years plus or minus airport design and construction experience, not quite as much as Tom, and have focused on alternative delivery for the last 8 to 9 years. So I've worked on both the owner side and the private side as technical advisor and as procurement and program manager, and on P3s in Los Angeles, Kansas City, and Denver, as well as other project types that we're considering P3 delivery. And so what we want to share with you today, if you want to...
Yeah.
What we want to share with you today is our presentation is going to highlight the prudent due diligence that we recommend around airport P3s and the need for a technical advisor early in the process. We also want to share some lessons learned on the challenge of an unsolicited single source airport P3. This will be a case study that we share kind of to give some real life examples of what we're talking about, look at the insights and key aspects around a good technical advisor. And the reason we brought this topic up is that all too often with P3 deals, we see them become so focused on the legal and financial structure that the crucial building blocks of the equation around technical design, the complexity and regional nature of construction are not fully taken into account. And this leads to errors and very unrealistic assumptions, which can dramatically increase the actual risk on the project as well as the cost that's assumed around these areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom for the case study.
Great. And Julie, you can see the screen, correct?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Just confirming. So first I want to talk about a case study at the Bermuda International Airport. It was for a redevelopment program for their terminal. A little bit of history. Bermuda Airport was first developed by the U.S. and British military as an air base to provide air cover for the Allies against Germans' submarine warfare in the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. Then the airport was operated by the U.S. military all the way until 1995, when it was turned over to the Bermuda government. And the FAA still operates the air traffic control at the airport. A little more history. HNTB was commissioned in 2007 to do a comprehensive master plan. And the findings of the 2009 master plan report concluded that the existing facility and parts of it, which were dated back to 1940s and 50s, had reached the end of its useful life. Given its age and the disrepair it was in, it was concluded the facility might not be able to withstand future extreme hurricanes, and it would have cost over $167 million just on basic modifications and maintenance. So here's some photographs of the new terminal underway. For the Bermuda terminal redevelopment P3 deal, it is a guaranteed all-exclusive one that includes design, build, finance, operate, and maintain on a fixed price basis. To complete the proposal, it was a sole source of a developer backed by the Canadian government, which had to prepare a design accompanying traffic forecasts, environmental studies, geotechnical testing, and financial modeling of the deal, and other necessary reports and analysis, all that at the sole provider's expense. It's different from a traditional process where it might have been a more competitive proposal, but that would have required the Bermudian government to incur substantial costs, probably over 20 million, in order to do the same due diligence as the provided by the developer. And part of the role that a technical advisor has, and the HNTB had on that, was to go through the due diligence and make sure that the developer was providing the necessary due diligence for the project. So the project began in March of 2017, and a government study found that the existing terminal had reached the end of its useful life, and it was agreed between the government of Bermuda and Canada and the construction contractor and operator to build a new project at the cost of about $267 million. And then a special purpose company called Skyport, as set up by the developer, was formed to do the operate and maintain of the project. So moving on, these are just photographs of the project. So the agreement includes design, financing, construction of the terminal, as well as operational maintenance for 30 years, all at the developer's expense. The government first entered into the agreement with the Canadian Corporation Council, which is the part of the Canadian government who sponsor the project, to develop and construct a new terminal building on time, on budget, and according to modern international specifications. It engaged in a chosen prime contractor and created a special operator, while the government established an airport authority to provide operational and contractual oversight of that operator. So here's another image. So HNTB played the technical, or had the role of the technical advisor on this project, and it's a key role that needs to be held from the very conceptual beginning of the project until commercial and financial close of the P3 deal. So kind of summarizing why sole source. So the Bermuda airport had, unfortunately, kind of a slow passenger growth, and tourism growth was declining. In interviews with P3 developers prior to the solicitation or before a sole source was considered, indicated there was not a lot of interest. Bermuda is a small country and didn't have the institutional or financial procurement or management capacity to develop a new terminal project. And they, through much due diligence and use of all of the various owner consultants, Bermuda chose to negotiate an approach. In this case, it involves a private sector developer contractor with support of the Canadian Commercial Corporation. So here's some lessons learned specifically on Bermuda and the P3 there.
And Tom, could I interrupt? I wanted to point out, you were the technical advisor for this project. You'd actually been part of the planning and master plan team, and then went over to the owner side to represent the owner as the technical advisor, and worked with a bigger team to pull this together, as well as then represent the owner, correct?
That's right. And I think it's a very important fact that there was history of the technical provider, in this case, HNTB, doing the master plan and then following through on being the technical advisor during the P3 due diligence consideration and then the actual financial and commercial close. So here's some of the other lessons learned. A value for money analysis is very necessary on all deals with significant capital projects, but especially a P3. Mitigation of a failed procurement. What that means is that a tender process always has a risk of a failed procurement. And we've seen those, for example, like Chicago Midway. But Bermuda was at great risk with limited interest. So a no-bid scenario would expose the government to some significant costs and delays. And a negotiated approach allowed the government to customize their specifications and their goals specifically for their needs and actually get more specificity from this developer. So there's a reduction of procurement costs because we didn't have to go through a whole solicitation and then review of multiple bidders. There's also a value-based CapEx proposal based on credit constraints faced by the government. The developer had proposed a much lower construction price than the estimated original studies and resulted in no requirement for the Bermuda government to provide capital contribution. And then value-based financial proposal, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, which is it's a little bit like United States USAID, they backed the credit rating. So that brought and also the fixed price construction contract. And so that significantly reduced risk and the credit borrowing costs.
So kind of an important takeaway from that is, although Tom is giving a lot of very specifics that are unique to this project, is that with any P3 structure as the owner, there is a fairly wide range of what you can put together. There's no one way to do this. And so having good advisors helps you look at all of the options and bring in precedents and case studies, both from other airports and other industries. Because that's something I've definitely heard as we've reviewed Bermuda again, is that what was done there worked for Bermuda, but you can see the range of options within all of the different areas. So that these deals are possible, even though each airport and each airport financing structure is unique.
So just to conclude on Bermuda, it's opening here at the end of the year. So we're very excited about that project and for the government. It was a very successful P3 project. So now we're going to move on to what does a technical airport advisor bring to the owner team? And Julie, you want to?
Yeah. So some of the things we've learned, and we can reach back into this case study as an example. As Tom pointed out, there's area where the technical advisor was crucial, both in this case study, and we'll look at some lessons learned going forward. But the importance of having a good technical advisor that has a broad base of airport-specific knowledge is critical, because design and construction and development on an airport is very unlike any other project type. There are similarities to other vertical construction. There are similarities in a P3 deal structure to some other types of P3 deals. But airports have a lot of rules, regulations, and stipulations that are fairly unique to that project type. So developing a deal without advisors who really understand the airport's unique structure and the aspects of building on airport, especially if you plan to remain operational during construction, could leave you open to risk or paying too much for the risk that doesn't actually exist.
So some other reasons for technical advisors is that they should be able to help develop the following things: the technical requirements based on experience, so they need to have that airport experience. P3 agreement, contract capitalization and analysis over the term of the contract. Key performance indicators used for building an infrastructure on the project, maintenance, and recapitalization. This is very important, and an advisor, a technical advisor, can really help the owner understand how the developer should maintain that project and how it needs to be, repaired over time. So it's very important that those KPIs are included. Sustainability goals. We see this more and more with our climate change in our world. These are all important parts of P3s. Design, construction, and maintenance agreement language. So we work a lot with the attorneys. Attorneys are great and necessary on these projects, but we bring a lot of lessons learned from airport construction. that can be incorporated in those agreements. Technical review and evaluation of the P3 proposals themselves from the bidders. We've seen on some, excuse me, some projects where all the various consultants advising the owner are at the table maybe during due diligence, and then when it comes to review, the owner only has a few select entities helping them review the proposal. We believe this is not prudent. The reason for that is that there's always, every expert in every discipline of the owner team needs to review their sections of the P3 bidders' proposals.
Correct.
Also, analysis of aviation forecasting and master planning. So in the case of Bermuda, that history of doing the aviation forecasts, working with the airlines, doing the airport master plan, understanding the entire airport technical requirements was a great help in becoming eventually the technical advisor to the airport doing the P3.
And Tom, that actually helps set the parameters. It's we're kind of walking through a lot of different parts, but these are all normal things that you would put together as part of a basis of design, regardless of your project delivery. And just having someone who understands how those basis of design comes together helps set the criteria and parameters around a project. So having a technical advisor who knows how that works and has possibly done that before gives you your boundaries, so you don't have to ask those extraneous questions moving forward. You know where your backstop is.
Yeah, and another example is when the developer comes in, they'll do their own forecast, aviation forecast, but somebody needs to check that for reality and make sure that it's neither not too optimistic nor too conservative. So another aspect is airport design or construction management. This is very essential in helping create the project agreement terms and conditions for design and construction. And then having direct airport and design construction experience aids that. And that is in all aspects of the airport: terminal architecture, landside and airside engineering, utility engineering, and airport support facilities.
When your technical advisor, having come on early, can also help vet the credentials of the designer and construction teams that are part of the bigger concessionaire, and ensure that you, the owner, are asking the right questions around partnering and qualifications. Because so often there's, the way credentials are presented, understanding what those mean and what's been done, as well as literally checking resources and references, call the other projects, was crucial in some of the P3s I've worked on to really understand what the experience meant when you saw the project sheet.
The technical advisor also should understand commissioning and how to migrate from in most cases, an old infrastructure or a terminal building to a new. They have to understand airport operations and maintenance and life cycle costs over the term of the contract. Return on investment and net present value options and a capital improvement to meet the goals. There's a lot of ways to, quote, skin the cat on meeting the goals of an airport's needs. And so you need to look at the costs and of those different values. You need to understand airport finance and funding streams. In the US, several airport funding streams are not allowed to be used on certain parts of an airport. We found this a problem on the Chicago Midway project, where we had some foreign participants who wanted to use certain FAA money any way they wanted. We had to point out to them that, no, that doesn't work. They're limited in their use. And then environmental processes for airports.
So we recommend you hire a technical advisor early when you first start developing your project and your basis of design around what it is that you're wanting to be part of the project. And the technical advisor should be able to help you answer some key questions and keep a realistic perspective on what your core challenges are, strategic goals and objectives. What can this project really accomplish? Why are you looking at doing a P3 versus some other delivery method? And then help you evaluate existing solicitation processes. So this is something that too often gets forgotten, but most United States airports are arms of municipalities, they're airport authorities. They have very tight rules and regulations around solicitation for good reason, to protect the public, to get local and diverse outreach. Inclusion and diversity is a very big part of many of the airport procurements. And you need to understand that most often these processes and policies will also apply to the developer and how the developer procures additional services, even if that responsibility is transferred. So making sure that you don't need to possibly adjust policies ahead of time. Another area where we've seen this as a lesson learned is in most states have Open Records Act, which means, you know, people can request to see the documents from procurements and solicitations. You need to be very careful and very transparent about what will and won't be shared, because you want to keep the trust of the industry. You're asking them for some very technical, very proprietary information around financial information, and that is not necessarily something that can ever be released to the public, and you need to be upfront about that and make sure that you're not getting yourself into a legal situation internally on the owner side about what can and can't be released. And then understanding what appeals to the private sector. And of course, if you're looking for good, competent, competitive bids, you want to be transparent, but you also want to be able to protect your concessionaires who are sharing very detailed information and being very open about partnering with you. And so what are the risks associated with that project, and what risks can and can't be transferred? So often we see some overblown statements on the value of risk transfer. Did you just pay more for the transfer of the same risk that you would have transferred under any other delivery method? For how long is the risk transferred? Often political risks and liabilities will come back on the owners fairly soon after financial close, even if it was assumed or determined that that risk would transfer. Sometimes it's just not possible because of the public figure of an airport. They're so often parts of the community, and you just need to be aware of that. What's reasonable? You know, what can transfer, what can't. Lots of things can be said, but what really happens? And so lessons learned on airport P3 projects. We've divided this up just kind of through the succession a little bit. We are open to questions, and we will have Q&A at the end if there are any questions about this, but just some high-level lessons learned. As we've already mentioned, understand the political processes and the goals. And these need to be vetted before you ever go into a P3, because when you get into the heat of a negotiation, you need to know where your backstop is. And before you get into a negotiation, you need to know if this is even legal in your state. What's very different between Canada and the United States and the EU and the United States is that the US doesn't have an overarching P3 policy that applies directly to every state or every airport in the same way. Each state, you're basically dealing with 50 different entities as well as territories. And you need to understand if the legislation is there that enables P3, although there may not be legislation that stops a P3. If that isn't enabled, there you are potentially setting yourself up for a lot of roadblocks along the way by entities that don't want a P3, don't like the way it's going, don't like the concessionaire. So you need to make sure that there's a clear path forward before you set down that path from a legal structure. And then listen to the ideas of the industry. This was a tremendous learning area for several of the clients, because for each owner, this may be the one P3 you do, but for the industry, they've done this a lot on different project types around the world. Having some open conversations, whether it's through an industry day or an open invite to participate, and really listen to what the P3 developers have to say pre-solicitation about what's exciting or interests them or would be attractive to them around this project, as well as things that would definitely kill the deal from their aspect. That will help you as the owner understand, you know, what you're really putting together and what your parameters are from the other side of the table. And then develop a basis of design and a financial model for yourself early on, so that you have a shadow model or a straw man, whatever you want to call it. You need to have your own understanding of how your own finances work, the different ways revenue is structured versus availability, and any kind of hybrid there can then be tested against, here's what you really want. It helps you remember why you got into this, what you're aiming for, and ultimately, if the deal doesn't answer your needs, that's when you stop. Or you as collectively can make decisions, but you at least know what you're aiming for. And I think that's really important for the owner side team to put their own model together. And whether the model stays the same, it doesn't actually matter, but you know where you started and why you're doing this, and you have something to test against, because the industry is very creative. They'll come up with some wonderful ideas, and you need to understand what those can mean to you. We go to the next slide. So this is where, so project procurement, just overall, pulling the owners to team together early builds credibility with the industry, because you have experts and qualified advisors who've done this before. It helps build the trust and credibility. Knowing where an owner needs, well, one of the things that we recommend is that the owner's team should be hired as professional service contracts and not be contingent on the value of the P3 deal or whether it goes through. It dramatically changes the motivation, and the money invested in a good technical advisor isn't lost even if the deal doesn't move forward, because so much of what has been gained in project understanding is applicable to other delivery models and other delivery methods. So again, when technical criteria and requirements are not defined in a sufficient detail or not given an appropriate weight to protect the owner, this is where the quality of your asset and life cycle lives or dies. Is in your technical requirements and in your preparation before you ever get into negotiations. So the technical advisor needs to work hand in hand with the owner's legal P3 consultant. Don't try to have a management team in the middle of these two key advisors. Have them be part of the same team. They need to be able to craft documents that go in lockstep as you move forward. Although the legal team will be doing the negotiation and there's an extensive amount of due diligence that they will also provide, you need to make sure that the technical requirements and the aspects of the review of the project are always hand in hand, so that the documents all completely work together and don't end up negating some part of one or the other.
Julie, that's really important. When I was on the Bermuda project, I worked with the agreement attorney on a weekly basis, sometimes day in, day out basis, as we shared the authorship of various parts of the agreement. Obviously mine was on the technical parts, but as the attorney there would write some things in another clause, I could warn him that had impacts on some of the technical aspects of the P3 deal, and then vice versa. So it's very important for that collaboration to occur between the technical advisor and the legal team.
And there's a tremendous, I've had the same experience, there's a tremendous amount of advantage to the technical side and legal side actually educating each other as they move forward with the documents, so that the owner is getting a consistent and clear message. And one thing on this slide that we point out with the question mark is the role and importance of a project champion. We have a whole nother session around project champions, but it's important to understand that your technical advisor is not your project champion. They can completely support that person or whoever that is, but often the project champion, needs to be someone that's, can rise above the details of the technical aspects of the team and really represent the airport and the project. And we just wanted to point that out as we were moving forward. And so some of the things when you get into solicitation and selection is, what's been done in Europe or elsewhere in the world, as we mentioned, or other industries, is not always directly applicable to airports in the United States. We've kind of seen a painful lack of understanding in some cases around building codes, federal aviation regulations, construction bonding, sort of the normal parts of construction that can dramatically inflate the risk and the cost of the deal back to the owner, because too often the unknowns will have money thrown at them that doesn't have to be there if you really understand. There are a lot of rules and regulations, but they aren't necessarily hurdles if you understand the project. And then again, responsibility for some policies is not transferable. So to understand that before money is starting to be accounted for, what really can be transferred and what can't. The lack of understanding around building codes could dramatically change that. And then we wanted to also point out that having this owner's team that's developed their own costs for the owner to kind of vet any deal structures that come in, so that if anything is outside that range, it should raise questions. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but it helps you understand, where your boundaries are when it comes to the financial structure. And then also taking into account the life cycle costs. They should be a criteria for the materials and equipment as well as the O&M over time.
And a good example of that, when I worked on the Athens Airport P3 deal, there were two competitors, a French one and a German one, without naming names. And the French had proposed a much better financial proposal, but the technical advisor, in that case, myself and the team I had, proved to the owner that even though the French had a better financial proposal, what they were actually basing that financial proposal on was not it's not applicable. The cost estimates were not accurate, and the owner went with the German proposer. So that's a lessons learned there. So some other lessons learned: terms and conditions for all the what ifs. So another important part of a technical advisor is to be on the team to go through all those what ifs to get into the agreement language of the P3 deal. And that comes from various sources, insurance, legal, economic, but a lot comes from the technical, and those what if terms and conditions need to be added. Each member of the owner team needs to be part of the tender review. Very, very important that all of the owner team with the various expert disciplines review the tender documents and not be just a select few. The RFP terms and technical requirements can be your backstop. And the delivery project of the project, the owner's technical representative really needs to be given authority to act on issues and disputes as the owner's rep on technical matters. We've seen sometimes that be taken up by non-technical people, owners themselves, without technical advice, and we've seen that not turn out in the best interest of the owner in the long run. So that concludes our lessons learned today, and we're happy to take any of your questions or observations, and you can contact Julie and I at these websites or emails, and I look forward to your questions. So I guess we'll look at the questions. So
one of the questions we're getting, Tom, is, I'll read these off to you. I know your screen is working differently, is whether a GC perspective is there value in including a GC perspective in the technical advisory team? And if yes, would it usually preclude them from bidding the work? And if not, included in the I think that's a great perspective.
That's a good question, Julie. I think it would be a conflict, but I don't think it would be. I think it would be valuable to get some. I would call it not a GC, but a construction manager or someone who's done. If it's an airport project, that somebody's done airport construction, I think it would be very valuable for them to be on the team. However, they would be privy to way too much information to also be on the proposing teams. So it'd be a conflict.
And one way to possibly get around that is if you've put your basis of documents together early and put your shadow model or your sort of financial deal basis together, so you have an understanding of the value of the project. As long as that is all released and shared as part of the RFP, and those individual GCs and other design members are no longer part of the procurement process, similar to when you do a master plan and then you use the master plan as the basis of document, as long as they're not part of the procurement team where they're privy to some special information and everything they did is released. It's several RFPs. As long as you release all of the design and construction information up to this point, it shouldn't necessarily preclude them unless there's, every airport has different rules and policies, but there is an opportunity to not be precluded as long as you're no longer part of the internal dialogue going on and you're not developing the solicitation itself. You're simply, your information is being used as a basis and being shared with all the other teams. That's when I could see that they're not precluded. And so one of the while we see some of the other questions coming in, one of the things going back to like slide 21 and 22 is when you look at, this was a question I actually wanted to pose to Tom, is talking about on slide 22, each member of the team needs to be part of the tender review. We do think that is very important, and where that can become an issue is if your procurement policies or solicitation policies require you, like some cities currently do, to have complete outside entities. For instance, some airports will draw, it's almost like your name's being drawn out of a hat on most procurements to be on the selection committee. And that's where you really need to make sure you have expertise on the selection committee who understand what your goals and objectives are and understand what they're reading when it comes in. And they also need to dedicate a significant amount of time. The amount of information you're reviewing under a P3 is dramatically more than if you were just procuring a designer for a terminal or a parking garage, and same for a contractor. I'm not going to say it's harder, but it is a little more complex, and it takes more time to look at the connections and understand, you're basically procuring the designer, the contractor, your financier and developer all at the same time, where normally these would be done as separate procurements. And so you need to account for that additional time and that additional expertise that's needed. So it may be that you have to adjust your procurement policies or solicitation policies early on to make sure you're allowed to have the kind of selection committee that's necessary for really picking the right team.
Yeah, I would really emphasize it's really important to have the same team all the way through, doing the very early studies of a P3, do through the due diligence, and then also through the selection and commercial and financial close. We understand that some public entities might have to have a selection committee, but the owner team should be reviewing those, making recommendations in each of their expertise, and then the selection committee then has a great basis to make their final decision.
And then as an example, while we're looking at questions, an example of something that could be like that would not be transferable that you might assume is transferable is when you're looking at concessions, and talking not the concessionaire bringing the P3, but concessions as in food and beverage and retail within an airport. Quite often there's a ACDBE policy around how those selections are made that requires a certain level of local or disadvantaged or small business participation. And those can't be ignored or discounted by a developer coming in. If you're transferring the ability of the developer now to make those selections and put their overall revenue together for a terminal, you need to be really clear, both with yourself and your development partners who are part of the solicitation, of what rules, what policies can and can't be transferred. Because if all of those rules still need to be followed in the same way by the developer, that will impact their revenue model. And it's just important that everyone understands that. It certainly doesn't make anything impossible, but it's important to know that so you're not backtracking and creating a whole lot of headache for both sides because that was not accounted for. And that's just one example of something that's not always transferable. The other item that may not be, or an other item that may not be transferable, it's also hard to quantify, is the political risk. Airports are huge parts of the community, and they are hugely the economic generators of the areas in which they're located. And so there's a lot of political clout and political responsibility to the public that, regardless of how the deal is put together, legally, it may not be their responsibility, but politically, you can't avoid having to address issues that come up. And there's always going to be issues. Every deal, no matter how wonderful, even in the smallest, normal, typical construction project, there's always issues that come up. But being prepared for those, having good insight by having done this before, and knowing where those red flags might be and preparing for those. And the political risk is one of those that the owners really need to give heavy consideration to before entering into a P3 deal, because regardless of the legal risk and financial risk that you may be able to transfer, you're still the face of the airport and you're still the face of the community, unless this has, become a complete privatization, which is a different model and not really what we're talking about.
Yeah, and Julie, another question there is about transparency. Transparency is so important especially when in the political realm. We've seen some airports who have not had transparent processes, and I don't think those are viewed as have gone very well. You need to have a very transparent, level playing field. You need to have ways and straightforward ways of communicating to the bidders in a fair manner. So it just goes to credibility to the project and ultimately success of the project, because anything that blows up that it was not transparent, it slows the project down and creates costs and risk.
And then let's see, another area related to stakeholder, kind of overall stakeholder and the owner's team, is to not underestimate the collaboration with the airlines. Although the deal structure may be, a direct contract with the airport or the municipality where the airport is located, the airport is in some cases, beholden to the airlines and their structure. And we've seen this go really well, and we've seen this go fairly poorly in some cases. And one document that's important to develop early before you get into procurement sometimes is your MOU, or your memorandum of understanding with the airlines specific to the project. And so, the airlines are not necessarily partners or parties in the contracts, but they are huge influencers, and each airport knows the value of that based on their own lease and revenue structures with the airlines. But one example that we think was successful from the MOU perspective is in Kansas City, where a memorandum of understanding was put together with the airlines, giving the airlines an actual seat at the table in vetting, as the process moves forward. And I know the airlines have been very supportive there. And this is from me interviewing airlines and interviewing staff on the team, and that memorandum has been successful to a great extent. And then we've seen P3 projects without an MOU, and quite often there's a lot of pushback from the airlines, and creates a hurdle moving forward.
What's important about the MOU is not only, you would think the airlines just want to know, well, how much is it going to cost me? What the cost per plane passenger is, and how fast can they raise rates and charges, but that's just part of it. The other very important part the airlines want to know about is the technical part. What am I getting for the money? Mm-hmm. So they want detailed documents and criteria documents of what they're getting. So how many gates? Is there going to be ground power? Down to the details. They want to know what they're buying for their money.
Exactly.
So I think we're close to the end of our time, 45-minute time. So I want to say to the audience, thank you for listening. And we'd love to answer more questions. You can reach Julie and I at HNTV at our email addresses, or through the conference. There's a way to share information as well, and contact us. We'd be happy to answer more of your questions. We really enjoy our work on these type of P3 projects. Julie, you want to close?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to be part of the conference, and thank you for your time today.
Bye-bye.